Learn Japanese history.
We are your navigators, Taro and Hanako.
Welcome. Today, we're doing a deep dive into a really pivotal time in Japanese history.
That's right. We're looking at the evolution of the early imperial state, specifically that big shift away from Nara.
And the setting up of Heian, what we now call Kyoto. We'll explore why this happened and what it meant for how Japan was governed.
Yeah, it's about getting a solid grasp on a major turning point. So you have the late Nara period, early Heian, big changes happening.
Huge changes, not just moving the capital, but really fundamental shifts in administration, too. So, what was the main driver behind leaving Nara?
Well, a key figure here is Emperor Kanmu. He came after Emperor Conan, and he really wanted to establish a new political base.
Away from Nara. Why?
Nara had become, well, deeply connected with the old guard. Powerful established groups, especially the big Buddhist temples, they had a lot of sway.
Ah, okay. So Kamu wanted a bit of distance from that influence, a fresh start for the imperial court.
Exactly. He was looking to sort of reset the power dynamic, strengthen imperial authority away from those entrenched interests.
So it wasn't just about finding a better view, it was strategic.
Definitely strategic. And the place they chose, Yamashiro province, it had real advantages.
Like what?
Better transport, basically. Access to water routes, land routes, much more convenient for governing and for, trade and economy, vital stuff for a growing state.
Right, makes sense. And this move, it wasn't instant, was it? They didn't just pack up and go straight to Heian.
No, good point. There was an initial move first to a place called Nagaoka-kyo. That was in 784.
Okay, Nagaoka-kyo.
But that turned out to be temporary. The final, really decisive move was to Heian-kyo in 794.
794, that's the big date.
That's the one. It marks the start of the Heian period, and you have to remember this period lasted roughly 400 years.
Wow, 4 centuries. All the way until Minamoto Yoritomo set up the Kamakura shogunate. That really shows how important Heian became.
It does. It anchors that whole era. And looking back, you see this pattern of moving capitals. Asuka had various palaces.
Yeah, late 7th century.
Then a brief stop in Kyoto in 744, then Nagaoka-kyo, finally Heian-kyo. It's like the state was searching for its stable center.
Interesting way to put it. But relocating was only part of Emperor Kanmu's plan, wasn't it? He was also busy with internal reforms.
Oh, absolutely. A major focus for him was stabilizing the lives of the common people.
How so?
Well, he saw that the old conscript army system wasn't really working anymore. It was ineffective.
So what did he replace it with?
He set up something called the Kondei. These were basically sons of district officials, guys skilled in archery and riding horses. Their job was to guard the provincial government offices, the kokuga. These were the key local administrative centers.
So a more localized, maybe more professional kind of security force?
You could say that. Maybe more reliable, being drawn from local elites. He also pushed the Handen Shuju law. That's the one about distributing farmland.
Okay, land allocation.
And he tried to ease the burden on farmers. Lowered interest rates on government loans, the kushitsuko,
Right.
and cut back on various miscellaneous taxes, the zuyaku. It seems like a genuine effort to, make life a bit more stable for the agricultural base.
That suggests a focus on practical governance, on the well-being of the population. What about keeping the officials themselves in line? Any measures there?
Yes, definitely. He created a new post, the kagiushi.
Keijishi, what did they do?
They were inspectors, basically, sent out to audit provincial officials when their terms ended and new ones were appointed.
So oversight during transitions. To prevent corruption, maybe?
Exactly. To ensure accountability and smoother handovers, keep things running properly.
Okay, so we got the capital move, domestic reforms. But there was also conflict, wasn't there? Particularly with the Emishi people in the Northeast.
Yes, that was another major issue Kanmu had to deal with. Emishi resistance, or rebellions as the court saw them, had been ramping up towards the end of the Nara period.
So it was an ongoing problem he inherited.
Pretty much. And Kanmu took decisive action. He appointed a man named Sakanoi no Tamuramaro to a very significant position.
Which was?
Seitashkunin. It translates roughly as Commander-in-Chief of the Expeditionary Force against the Barbarians.
Wow. That title certainly makes a statement. Was Tamuramaro successful?
He was quite successful, actually. He managed to pacify the Emishi, extending imperial control further north up to the middle parts of the Kitakami River.
And how do they consolidate that control?
They built fortifications. Isawa Castle is a key one. And they moved the regional military headquarters, the Chinjufu, from Taga Castle to Isawa.
So projecting power into the region, I also read the emperor considered getting rid of most of the national army units, the Gundan.
That's right. It was considered moving towards almost abolishing them. It probably ties into strengthening the Condé system.
Well, local forces?
Yeah, and centralizing military power more directly under the emperor. But these embassy campaigns were expensive.
Ah,
Very expensive. That, plus the cost of building the new capital in Heian, put a real strain on the treasury.
and on the farmers who had to support it all, I imagine.
Absolutely. That financial pressure, the hardship, eventually led them to stop the major embassy campaigns. It just wasn't sustainable.
Let's pause on that term, emishi. It's important we understand who they were, right? It's not quite a simple ethnic label like we might think today.
That's a really crucial point. While there's evidence linking them to the Ainu people, historically, emishi was more of a political or cultural designation, meaning it referred to people in the Northeast who hadn't submitted to the central government, the Yamato court. They resisted imperial rule.
So it was about political allegiance, not just ancestry.
Primarily, yes. The state itself used different terms over time. Early on, things like suamono, meaning fierce warriors, maybe.
Yeah.
Later, iteki, which definitely had barbarian connotations.
Got it. And those fortified sites you mentioned, the Jusaku, like Taiga Castle and Izawa Castle, our understanding of them is changing too.
It is. For a long time, they were seen mainly as military bases, purely for controlling the emishi. Now, archaeology suggests they were much more than that. They were also major regional administrative centers.
Ah, like mini capitals for the region.
Sort of. They had common features, big walls, fancy roofed ramparts called Suiji-Bay, central government buildings. It seems they were also designed to impress.
To show off the power and authority of the central Ritsuryo state.
Exactly. A symbol of imperial presence in the Northeast, not just a fort.
Okay, so Emperor Kanmu's reign sets a lot in motion. The move, the reforms, the emishi campaigns. What happened after him? Did his successors continue these changes?
They did, generally. Emperor Heian and then Emperor Saga, who followed Kanmu, kept trying to refine the Ritsuryo system, that's the big legal and administrative code Japan had adopted, based on Chinese models.
But it wasn't all smooth sailing, was it? There was some pushback.
Right. There was a pretty significant event in 810, the Fujiwara no Kusuko incident. Some call it Emperor Heise's rebellion.
What happened there?
Essentially, the retired Emperor Heisei tried to take back power and, interestingly, wanted to move the capital back to Heisei-kyo, back towards Nara.
Ah, trying to undo Kanmu's big move.
Seems like it, but it didn't succeed. The attempt failed.
And did that incident lead to any further changes in government structure?
It did, actually. Emperor Saga, who successfully handled the situation, established a new position called the Kudo no Tu.
Kudo no Tu, head of the Imperial Secretariat.
That's the one. Designed to handle confidential state matters, kind of like the emperor's private secretary's office, but very powerful. Fujiwara no Fuyutsugu was the first one appointed.
So creating a closer, more trusted channel directly to the emperor.
Precisely. They became key advisors managing court stuff, linking the emperor with the Council of State, the Daijukan, a big shift in how the inner court worked.
Interesting. And wasn't there another new office created around then? For policing?
Yes, the Kadishi, the imperial police. Their job was basically law and order in the capital, Heian-kyo.
Okay, so Kudonoti and Kibishi. And you mentioned the Kagyushi earlier, the inspectors.
Right, and what's important about all three of these, Kurudo no Tu, Kibishi, and Kagyuchushi, is that they were Rijinokan.
Rijinokan, meaning?
Posts outside the original code. They weren't defined in the original Ritsuryo laws.
Ah, so the government was creating new jobs, new structures, as needed, even if they weren't in the official rulebook from the start.
Exactly. It shows they were adapting, finding practical solutions, innovating beyond the original blueprint. A sign of flexibility creeping in.
That makes sense. The original system, the Ritsuryo, must have been difficult to maintain perfectly. What about the tax system? Kanmu tried to reform it. Did those efforts continue to evolve?
They had to. Sticking rigidly to the original Ritsuryo tax principles was proving really hard. So again, they adapted with more pragmatic policies.
Like what, for instance?
A big one was the creation of kuzen in 823. These were publicly managed rice fields, set up initially in Kyushu under the Dazefu's control.
Publicly managed fields. How did that work?
They took about a sixth of the regular allocated fields, Kobunden, plus some surplus land, and put it under this system.
And who farmed them?
Local powerful figures managed them, and farmers worked the land. In return, the farmers got food, and their labor counted towards their taxes.
Ah, so the harvest from these kyudin was used to cover the farmers' main taxes. the So, Chach, and You.
That's the idea. The government collected the rest. It was quite a shift from the old system of taxing individual adult males based on their land allocation.
It sounds like the state getting more directly involved in managing agricultural production to secure its revenue.
That's a good way to put it. And this wasn't a one-off. Similar systems followed, like Kandon's state-owned fields and Shoshin fields to support specific government offices, basically providing salaries, all moving away from the pure Ritsuryo model.
And the laws themselves were being updated too, right? With things called kaku and shiki.
Yes, exactly. The government kept issuing kaku, which were like amendments or additions to the Ritsuryo codes,
Okay.
and shiki, which were detailed regulations on how to actually implement the laws, the Ritsu and Ri. These came out as imperial edicts or decrees from the Council of State.
So these new rules and regulations became the day-to-day legal standard.
Pretty much. They were the practical law of the land. And Emperor Saga even started compiling them systematically.
The Kunin Kyakushiki.
That's the one. And later emperors continued this, leading to the Jogan Kyakushiki and the Ingi Kyakushiki. Together, they're called the Three Generations Kyakushiki.
San Kyakushiki.
Yeah. And they became a really important legal source, almost as significant as the original Ritsuryo codes themselves. It shows an ongoing effort to keep the legal system functional and relevant.
Like constantly patching and updating software, in a way.
Maybe. And separately, Emperor Juna, they also compiled the Rino Gij,
What was that?
an official commentary on the Ryu, the administrative part of the code, trying to ensure everyone understood the rules the same way. So adaptation and clarification were key themes.
So wrapping up this deep dive then, it's really clear the move to Hanakyo wasn't just changing addresses. It was tied into, and maybe even drove, a whole series of major changes in how Japan was run.
Absolutely. It was part of a much bigger picture. Emperor Kanmu kicked things off, dealing with internal stability, external pressures, and the emperors after him kept tweaking and adjusting the system.
Adapting the Ritsuryo framework to fit the realities on the ground.
Exactly. You see the early Japanese state becoming perhaps a bit less reliant on the pure Chinese model and developing its own ways of handling power and administration. It's quite dynamic.
And understanding these shifts, these adaptations back then, really helps you grasp how Japanese politics and society developed later on, doesn't it?
Definitely. The foundations for a lot of what comes later, especially in the Heian period itself and beyond, are being laid right here.
It sets the stage.
It really does. Which leads to a good question for you to think about as you continue looking into Japanese history. How did these early adjustments, these Ryujei no Kan posts, these changes to the tax system, these kyakushiki, how might they have paved the way for the even bigger changes we see later in medieval Japan? What parts of this transition period do you think left the longest shadow?